Hi there, my name is Adam Fielding. I am a long-term Reason user, and I've been having an absolute blast using the synth Objekt recently. I had the very good fortune of being asked to put together a Reason Plus sound pack focusing entirely on Objekt sounds, and it's very, very quickly become one of my absolute favorite synths in Reason. So I thought it would be jolly exciting to put together a video in which I create an Objekt patch from scratch, showing off some little tricks and tips that I've picked up in my time using Objekt. So, with all of that said, less of the talk, more of the noise making. Hope you enjoy this little trip into Objekt patch creation land. Let's go! So, one thing I've been doing quite a lot of recently is creating some nice cinematic kind of textures using Objekt that have this really nice sort of ethereal, otherworldly sound to them, while having this almost organic, grounded sound to them at the same time. It's really neat. So what I'm hoping to do is to create a patch like that from scratch for you today. So first things first, looking at the exciter section, this is going to be more of a pad textural type sound, so we don't really need the exciter impact turned up at all, because that's more suited towards malleted and struck or even plucked kind of sounds. That's not really what we're going for today. We're going for something that sounds more blown or bowed. So I'm going to play around with the exciter noise section. Let's start with color type noise. That'll work nicely. So let's adjust the attack and release. And there we go. It's a nice little start. I'm just going to turn the compressor on just because I feel like things might get a little hairy if I'm messing around with sounds. So I'm going to turn the velocity to level amount down on the exciter noise so that my wonky playing doesn't interfere with your ability to hear what's actually going on. So for the sake of expediency, today I'm going to be using a template to get started with Objekt 1. This is a great place to start if you want a sound that sounds like any of these things, really. So for today, let's start with string low. String low. Oh, it's a bit harsh at the moment, so I might turn the rate down on the noise. Maybe turn that down a little bit. Maybe use the damping section to tame the highs a little bit. So that's a nice start. So something else I like to do when I'm working with templates, or if I've got an idea I like, but I just need to zhuzh up a little bit, is to use the randomize section. So I'm just going to set the randomize to 50%. How's that sounding? Interesting. So it'd be nice to have something somewhere between those two sounds, but not perfectly so. So one thing I tend to do after I've used the randomize function is to kind of round out the frequency values of each individual band. So instead of having 3 to start with, let's go with 4. And instead of 0.69, let's go with 0.5. So you end up with something that sounds a bit more harmonic rather than that inharmonic sound that we started with. I think I'll leave everything else alone because I quite like that extra sort of weird sound going on there. So I'm going to use the automatic tuner at the top to correct the pitch. That sounds roughly okay for now, so I'm just going to leave that as it is. Maybe play around with the exciter noise rate a little more. I quite like how that's sounding. So I'm going to adjust the decay time on this object, as that can have a huge impact on how it's sounding. So that brings in more of that tonal sound rather than focusing more on the noise. If we turn it right down, it's basically just noise. We bring in that tonal element by turning the decay up. I'm going to turn the width up on that object, so we've got a nice wide textural sound. And let's bring that up a bit as well so we can hear what we're doing. Okay, so that's sounding reasonably pleasant. Let's leave that for now. Let's move on to the modal section. So again, I'm going to load up a template just so we've got somewhere to go. Let's try a harp. That'll be interesting. So I'm going to turn the decay down a bit so it's not quite as harsh. And let's randomize that a little bit as well. That's interesting. And again, I'll just round these values to, so that's 0.5. 2.92 is kind of interesting. I feel like if these values are sort of slightly over or under what I would consider to be more rounded values, you're going to end up with some nice, interesting, slightly inharmonic sounds that give the sound a bit more flavor. So that sounds quite eerie. So what I'm going to do with this is I'm actually going to dial that right back in the mix section, turn Object 1 back on, turn that down, and introduce a little bit of that into the input mix of Object 1. So the modal section is feeding into the input of Object 1 now. Maybe a little less. So it's giving it that sort of weird, sort of scraped sound to it. So that's sounding quite interesting. I haven't really touched on any of the other elements yet, so I feel like now is an opportune time to do that. So I'm going to leave the high damping turned down on Object 1, as it's already sounding a bit on the harsh side. I might adjust the slope, see how that sounds. So that helps to roll it off just a little bit more. I think that works. I'm going to scoop some of the mids a bit, and I'll leave the lows alone. The low cut can probably come down a little bit. So collision's an interesting one. That can introduce these interesting sort of bounces and collisions into the sound. So if I just bring the amount up and bring the bounce up, you'll be able to hear what that does to the sound. So it sounds like it's almost scraping along this weird string. So I wasn't sure if I was going to like that, but I'm going to leave that for now. It's a very interesting extra little element. One other thing is the pitch mod section, which does interact with the collision section. So typically this would be more useful if you're using the exciter impact, as it kind of gives the initial impact more of a twang kind of sound. So it's great for string plucks and that kind of thing. But it can work nicely with the collision as well. So if we just bring that in. Okay, so I feel like that's enough playing with Object 1 for now, so let's bring in Object 2, and we're going to do the exact same thing that we did with Object 1 in terms of bringing in Object 1 into the input mix of Object 2. So basically we've got this weird recursive thing going on where the modal object's feeding into Object 1, which is feeding into Object 2. So you need to be very careful when you start playing with these elements like this though, because you can end up with some really harsh resonances, but I think we'll be okay. Fingers crossed. Here we go. Well, I'll turn that down a bit, and I'm going to load up another template. So let's go with Metal 1 for Object 2. And once again, let's introduce a bit of randomness to this. I do feel like this is a little bit of a cop-out, but for the sake of expediency, I feel like you don't want to watch me playing with frequency values for the next half an hour. So that's sounding like this. So let's bring in a bit of Object 1. See, now I'm not so hot on that collision on Object 1, so I'm going to go back and dial that back and maybe introduce that into Object 2. And now it's not doing anything. Well, that is interesting. Let's bring that up. Well, no harm. So let's just listen to Object 2 in isolation. So we got this sort of unsurprisingly metallic sound. So let's smooth the highs a bit on that. Let's dial that back. Actually, no, let's bring that up. I quite like that ringing type sound. And let's adjust the decay. So by introducing that pitch mod, we're getting a a nice, interesting sort of pitch variance with those little bounces that you can hear in the background. So let's turn on all of the objects. And now I'm going to use the automatic tuner just to tune the patch correctly. So we're just getting those little dings on Object 2 as we have those collisions that are introduced and adding a little bit of variation. So that's kind of nice. I'm just going to adjust the exciter noise just to hear how that affects the sound. So we've got this interesting kind of, it sounds almost like a bowed glass instrument, but with something bouncing on it, or even, you know, something that's being blown through. It's very, it's an instrument that has a feel to it, but I mean, I can imagine it existing, but I can't imagine what it would look like. So let's bring the velocity to level up a bit so we have a bit more dynamism as we're playing it. So that's sounding interesting. Let's start adding some effects to this. So let's have a bit of delay, ping pong delay, and a bit of reverb. Let's turn the decay up. Let's have that enlarge hull. It's got to be a big reverb, of course. And let's use the EQ to give it a nice bit of a smile EQ. So that sounded quite nice, I think. It'd be interesting to introduce some pitch drift. So I'm going to use LFO1 to control Object 1 pitch and Object 2 pitch, and I'm going to set those to opposite values. So let's say 3 for Object 1 and -3 for Object 2. Turn the rate down on that. So something else I quite like to do is to add scales and chords player just to add an extra octave below the note being currently played. So I'm going to set the note's value to 1, set the scale to chromatic so it will affect every note that I play, and click on octave down so we'll get an extra octave down on each note we play, which sounds like this. So that's an interesting sort of semi-cinematic, blown, bowed, bounced glass kind of sound that created from scratch here. I'm just going to tweak the exciter noise again just to hear how that affects the sound. Definitely prefer that how it was. And there we have it, one weird, alien, ethereal, but weirdly organic textural patch. I hope you enjoyed that little trip into the world of Object patch creation. I always have a blast seeing where that's going to take me. If you haven't tried Object yet, it's available in the Reason Rack extension store right now, or better yet, if you're a Reason Plus subscriber, you already have access to it, so have at it. Either way, I hope you enjoy making interesting noises with this fascinating synth. I've only just scratched the surface, and I can't wait to see what else I get out of it in the future. So, thanks so much for joining me, and happy noise making! See you around.